I was 52 years old when something happened that I still struggle to put into words. For most of my life, I had lived quietly, carefully, almost invisibly. I wasn't the kind of woman people wrote stories about. I didn't chase love, and I never expected it to chase me back. Relationships came and went like passing seasons, never stormy, never unforgettable, just there, and then gone. I raised my daughter on my own, working long hours and stretching every bit of energy. I had to make sure she never felt the absence of anything. My home was small but warm, always carrying the comforting scent of lavender and strong coffee. It was my sanctuary, predictable, safe. And maybe that was the problem, because safety over time turns into silence, and silence can make you forget what it feels like to be seen. Last spring, I agreed to stay at my cousin Diane's house for a week. She and her husband were heading to Florida and needed someone to keep an eye on things, and more importantly, to help her son Jake while he recovered from knee surgery. Jake was 22, old enough to manage most things himself, but still needing a bit of help, especially with movement and errands. I hadn't seen him much over the years. Life had a way of pulling people in different directions, and children, especially, seem to grow up overnight when you're not looking. In my memory, he was still the little boy who used to run around barefoot in the yard, laughing too loud and leaving sticky popsicle kisses on my cheeks. But time doesn't pause for memories. It reshapes people. I arrived at Diane's house on a Friday evening. Everything felt familiar, the same furniture, the same creaky hallway floors, but quieter, emptier. Jake greeted me politely, a little reserved, a little distant. He had grown tall, broad-shouldered, with a calmness that didn't quite match the boy I remembered. We exchanged small talk, kept things light. Nothing unusual, nothing uncomfortable, at least not yet. The next morning was one of those heavy, humid spring days where the air clings to your skin. I woke up early, made myself coffee, and tried to settle into the rhythm of the house. By late morning, I decided to take a shower. It was simple, ordinary, a moment no different from 1,000 others in my life. And yet, it became the moment that changed everything. The bathroom window was slightly open, letting in a warm breeze that brushed against my damp skin as I stepped out of the shower. I wrapped myself in an old oversized robe, blue, worn at the sleeves, soft from years of use. The house felt quiet. Too quiet, maybe. But I didn't think much of it. I stood at the sink, gently applying lotion to my neck, watching my reflection in the mirror. There was nothing remarkable about what I saw, just a woman who had lived a long, steady life, a woman who had learned not to expect too much from the world. And then, the door creaked, softly, almost too softly to notice. At first, I thought it might be the wind, but then I saw movement behind me, in the mirror. I turned my head just slightly, and there he was, Jake, standing in the doorway. For a brief second, neither of us moved. His eyes widened instantly, shock freezing him in place. He looked like he had walked into something he never expected to see, and didn't know how to leave. I felt it too, that sudden, sharp awareness, not just of being seen, but of being noticed. "Oh," he stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "Aunt Maddie, I thought—" He turned quickly, one hand already reaching for the door, as if escape was the only option. "Jake, wait." The words slipped out of my mouth before I had time to think. I wasn't even sure why I said them. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was the shock, or maybe it was something I didn't yet understand. He paused. Slowly, he turned back, his face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I thought you were downstairs." "My brace, it's under the sink. I didn't know anyone was in here." I tightened my robe instinctively, taking a steady breath. "It's okay," I replied, my voice calmer than I felt. I should have locked the door. For a moment, we just stood there, both of us avoiding each other's eyes. The silence wasn't hostile. It wasn't angry. It was something else, something uncertain, fragile. "I can just come back later," he said, shifting his weight awkwardly. "No," I said, more quickly than I intended. "It's fine. I'll get it for you." I knelt down, opening the cabinet beneath the sink. My hands felt unsteady, and I suddenly became very aware of everything. The way the robe shifted, the way my skin felt exposed, the way the air seemed thicker than before. I found the brace and handed it to him, and when I looked up, we were closer than I expected. Too close. His hand brushed mine as he took it. It was nothing, a simple accidental touch, but it lingered, just for a fraction of a second longer than it should have. Thanks, he said quietly. I nodded, but neither of us stepped away. There was something in his eyes, something I hadn't noticed before. Not the carefree brightness of a child, not even just gratitude. It was softer, deeper, more aware. I remember when you used to chase me around the yard with a hose, he said suddenly. A faint smile forming. I let out a small laugh, grateful for the shift in tone. And you'd scream like I was attacking you, I replied. I thought you hated me. I didn't, he said, almost under his breath. Not even a little. Something about the way he said it, quiet, sincere, made the air between us feel different. Charged, but not in an obvious way. More like something had been uncovered. Something subtle. Something neither of us fully understood. I stepped back first, creating distance, restoring something that had shifted. Let's get that brace on properly, I said, focusing on the task. He nodded. We moved to the bedroom, and I helped him adjust it. My hands were steady now, but my thoughts weren't. Every small interaction, every accidental brush of fingers felt amplified. When we were done, he thanked me again. And that should have been the end of it. A simple misunderstanding. A forgettable moment. But it wasn't. Because that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the guest room, staring up at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly above me. The room was quiet, but my mind wasn't. I kept replaying it. The look on his face. The hesitation. The way his voice softened. And most of all, the way it made me feel. Not embarrassed. Not violated. Not even particularly uncomfortable. But aware. Seen. And that realization unsettled me more than anything else. Because it had been a long time. A very long time. Since anyone had looked at me like that. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket closer. It was nothing, I whispered to myself. Just an accident. But the feeling didn't go away. It lingered. Quiet. Persistent. And somewhere deep inside me, something stirred. Something I had spent years ignoring. Something I wasn't ready to name. Yet, and as I finally drifted into a restless sleep, one thought stayed with me. Not loud, not clear, but impossible to ignore. Something had changed, and I didn't know if I wanted it to go back. The next morning didn't feel like any other morning. Everything looked the same. The kitchen, the sunlight slipping through the curtains, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, but something underneath it all had shifted, subtly, quietly, like a crack forming beneath a calm surface, and I could feel it. I stood at the kitchen counter, stirring my coffee longer than necessary, watching the swirl fade into stillness. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, the memory returned, not just what happened, but how it felt. That was the part I couldn't escape, not the moment itself, but the feeling of being seen. Footsteps broke the silence, soft, uneven. Jake. I didn't turn right away. I wasn't ready, not yet. Morning, he said, his voice low, careful. I forced myself to look over my shoulder. Morning? He looked normal, too normal. Hair slightly messy, t-shirt loose over his shoulders. That same calm expression on his face. But his eyes, there was something in them. Something quieter than yesterday, but deeper, more aware. How's your knee? I asked, turning back to the counter, pretending to focus on pouring orange juice. Better, he said. Still stiff. I nodded. We'll do the exercises later. Yeah, he replied softly. A pause settled between us. Not awkward exactly, but not easy either. I felt his presence behind me, close enough to notice, far enough to pretend I didn't. And somehow, that distance felt heavier than closeness would have. I picked up my coffee and moved to the small table by the window, sitting down like everything was normal. He followed. Of course he did. Jake lowered himself carefully into the chair across from me. His movement slower because of his injury. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He reached for a spoon, then stopped, as if he'd forgotten what he was doing. Then he looked up, directly at me. You didn't sleep much either, did you? He said. I froze slightly. No, I admitted. Not really. Me neither. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. It wasn't casual. It wasn't something he said just to fill silence. It meant something, and we both knew it. I wrapped my hands around my mug, grounding myself in its warmth. It was just an awkward moment, I said, carefully choosing my words. These things happen. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back slightly, studying me in a way that made me feel exposed again. Not physically, but emotionally. It didn't feel like just an awkward moment, he said quietly. My breath caught. I looked down at the table. You're reading too much into it, I replied, though my voice lacked conviction. Am I? He asked. I didn't answer, because I didn't trust myself to. Another silence stretched between us, but this one felt different, thicker, heavier, like something was waiting to be acknowledged. Finally, I stood up, needing movement, needing space. I should start on lunch, I said quickly. But before I could walk away, his voice stopped me. Why aren't you with anyone? I turned back, surprised. What? He held my gaze now, steady and serious. I mean it. Someone like you? It doesn't make sense. A strange mix of emotions flickered through me. Confusion, discomfort, and something dangerously close to vulnerability. That's a personal question, I said. I know, he replied. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. But I could tell. He wanted me to. And for some reason, I didn't want to brush it off. I let out a slow breath and leaned lightly against the counter. Life doesn't always go the way you plan, I said. After a while, you just adjust. That's not the same as being happy, he said. His words landed softly, but deeply. I didn't say I was unhappy, I replied. But you didn't say you were happy either. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time I realized he wasn't asking out of curiosity. He was asking because he cared. I've learned to be content, I said after a moment. That's enough. He shook his head slightly. It shouldn't have to be. The simplicity of that statement unsettled me more than anything else he'd said, because it touched something I had buried a long time ago, something I didn't let myself think about. I think you're stronger than you give yourself credit for, he added. I gave a small, almost defensive smile. I've had to be. Yeah, he said softly. But that doesn't mean you always should be. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls had moved in just enough to make everything feel closer. More intense. I turned away again, focusing on slicing fruit, needing something ordinary to hold on to. But my hands weren't as steady as I wanted them to be. Later that afternoon, we went through his physical therapy routine. It was supposed to be simple, structured, safe. I guided him through each stretch, correcting his posture, reminding him to breathe through the discomfort. It gave me something to focus on, something practical. But even that didn't feel the same. At one point, he lay back on the mat, wincing as he extended his leg. I held his ankle gently, keeping it steady. Relax, I said. You're fighting it. I know, he muttered. It just hurts. You're stronger than you think, I said without thinking. He opened his eyes and looked up at me. So are you. The words were quiet, but they landed with weight. For a moment, neither of us moved. I realized my hand was still on his ankle, and his gaze. It didn't drift away this time. It stayed, steady, intent. I swallowed and gently let go, stepping back. Okay, I said, clearing my throat. That's enough for today. He sat up slowly, still watching me. Why do you keep pulling away? He asked. The question hit harder than I expected. I'm not, I said quickly. You are, he replied, every time it starts to feel real. I crossed my arms slightly, more out of instinct than defense. Jake, I'm not trying to make things uncomfortable, he said. But I need to know I'm not imagining this. My heart began to race. Imagining what? He hesitated, then said it. That there's something here. The words hung in the air. Unavoidable. Unignorable. I felt it again, that pull between instinct and restraint, between what made sense and what didn't. I don't know what this is, I said honestly, but I haven't stopped thinking about it. Neither had he. I could see it in his face. I'm not asking you to figure everything out right now, he said gently. I just don't want you to pretend it didn't happen. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, because pretending, that's what I had always been good at. Pretending things didn't matter. Pretending I didn't feel something when I did. Pretending I was okay with less. But this didn't feel like something I could ignore. That evening, the house felt quieter than usual, not empty, but full of unspoken things. I found myself standing outside his room at one point, my hand hovering near the door. I told myself I was just checking if he needed anything. But that wasn't the truth. I knocked lightly. Yeah? His voice came from inside. I stepped in. He was sitting up in bed, a book resting beside him, the lamp casting a warm glow across the room. You okay? I asked. Yeah, he said. Just thinking. About what? He didn't hesitate this time. You. My chest tightened. The honesty of it, the simplicity. I stepped further into the room, closing the door slightly behind me. That moment, he continued, his voice quieter now. Yesterday, It didn't feel like nothing. It didn't, I admitted. Then what did it feel like? I searched for the right words, but none of them seemed safe enough to say out loud. Different, I finally said. He nodded slowly. Yeah, he whispered. Different. We sat in silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, like something was growing between us. Something neither of us fully understood yet, but neither of us wanted to shut down. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like someone who had been left behind by life. I felt, noticed, wanted, alive in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a very long time. And that scared me, because once you feel something like that, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to being untouched by it. And as I left his room that night, closing the door softly behind me, one thought followed me down the hallway. The line between right and wrong hadn't disappeared, but it had started to blur, and I wasn't sure how long I could pretend not to see it. The morning everything became real didn't arrive with drama. No storm, no sudden chaos, just quiet sunlight stretching across the kitchen floor, the faint clink of a glass as I set it down, and a feeling in my chest I could no longer ignore. Clarity, not the comforting kind, the kind that forces you to choose. I stood at the sink, watching condensation slide slowly down the window. My reflection looked back at me, familiar, but not entirely the same. Something in my eyes had shifted over the past few days. I looked awake, and that scared me more than anything, because being awake meant I could no longer pretend. I didn't understand what was happening. Footsteps approached behind me, steady, slower than usual. Jake, morning, he said. I turned. Morning? There was no hesitation this time, no pretending things were normal. We both knew we had crossed into something that couldn't be undone, not physically, not even outwardly, but emotionally, and that was enough. I've been thinking, he said, leaning lightly against the counter. I know, I replied. Me too. He studied me carefully, as if trying to read the answer before I spoke it. What are we doing? He asked. Simple words. Impossible question. I looked down at my hands, then back at him. Something complicated. That doesn't mean it's wrong, he said. There it was again. That quiet certainty. That belief that feelings alone could justify something. And for a moment, just a moment, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to step into that version of reality where connection was enough, where loneliness didn't dictate boundaries, where feeling seen outweighed everything else. But life doesn't work that way. Not really. It's not that simple, I said gently. Why not? He asked. We're not hurting anyone. His words hit something inside me, because they were partially true. No one knew. No one was being directly affected. But that didn't mean no one would be. And more importantly, it didn't mean I wouldn't be. You're 22, I said quietly. And you're 52, he replied without hesitation. So what? So everything, I said, my voice firmer now. Life experience, power, perception, consequences. He frowned slightly. I'm not a kid. I know you're not, I said. That's not the point. Then what is the point? He pressed. I took a slow breath. The point is that I've lived long, enough to know that not everything that feels right is right. Silence fell between us. He looked away for the first time, and I could see it, the conflict in his expression. Not anger, not frustration, just disappointment. You felt it too, he said quietly. Don't act like you didn't. I'm not acting, I replied softly. That's exactly why this is so hard. That was the truth. The hardest part wasn't denying something that didn't exist. It was walking away from something that did, something real, something unexpected, something that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I haven't felt like this before, he admitted. His voice was quieter now, more vulnerable. And that matters, I said. It really does. Then why does it feel like you're trying to kill it? Because I had to, but saying that out loud felt too harsh, too final. I'm trying to protect both of us, I said instead. From what? From consequences you don't fully understand yet. He shook his head. You're assuming I'll regret it. No, I said. I'm assuming I might. That stopped him. And in that moment something shifted again, not between us, but inside me. Because for the first time, I said it clearly. This wasn't just about him. It was about me, my choices, my boundaries, my responsibility. I walked past him slowly, needing space, not from him, but from the weight of everything. I've spent most of my life doing the responsible thing, I continued. Not because it was always what I wanted, but because it was what I could live with later. He didn't respond, but I knew he was listening. This, I said, turning back to face him, this is something I wouldn't be able to undo. Not emotionally, not in how I see myself, not in how your mother would see me if she ever found out. His jaw tightened slightly at that. So this is about my mom? It's about everything, I said firmly. Family, trust, timing, and yes, how we would both have to carry it afterward. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated now. So what, you just shut it off? Like it meant nothing? No, I said softly. I don't get to pretend it meant nothing. Then what do you do with it? That question lingered in the air, because there wasn't a clean answer. No easy solution. You respect it, I said finally. And you let it go. He looked at me like that answer wasn't enough. And maybe it wasn't. But it was the only honest one I had. The rest of the day passed quietly. Not tense. Not broken. Just different. We still talked. Still shared small moments. But something had changed in the tone, in the way we looked at each other. The line had been redrawn, and this time, I made sure it stayed there. That evening, we sat on the patio one last time. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and pink, the air cooler now, carrying the faint promise of night. Neither of us spoke for a while, and somehow that silence felt more meaningful than anything we could have said. I meant what I said, he spoke eventually. About you? I smiled faintly. I know. And I'm not going to just forget this. I'm not asking you to. He nodded slowly. But I'll respect what you're choosing. That mattered more than he probably realized. Thank you, I said quietly. We sat there a little longer. Two people who had shared something real, but chose not to turn it into something irreversible. That night, I packed my bag, not because I had to leave immediately, but because I knew staying longer would only make it harder. In the morning, I found him in the kitchen again. Same place, same light, but everything felt settled, different from before, calmer. I'll head out today, I said. He nodded. Okay. No argument, no attempt to change my mind, just acceptance, and maybe a little sadness. We stood there for a moment, not quite sure how to end things. Then he stepped forward and hugged me. Not tightly, not in a way that crossed any lines. Just enough. I'm glad it was you, he said quietly. My chest tightened. Me too, I replied. And I meant it. Because despite everything, this experience had given me something I didn't even realize I had lost. Not him, but myself. The part of me that could still feel, still be seen, still matter. As I drove away later that day, the road stretched out in front of me, familiar and steady. But I wasn't the same person who had arrived a week ago. I had been reminded of something important, something easy to forget with time. That loneliness can make anything feel like destiny. That attention can feel like love. And that being seen, truly seen, can be powerful enough to blur even the strongest boundaries. But not everything you feel is something you should follow. Some doors open not to be walked through, but to show you they exist, so you remember who you are and what you stand for. If there's one thing I would tell anyone reading this, it's this. Be careful what you let grow in silence, because not every connection is meant to become a story. Some are just meant to be a moment, a lesson, a reflection of something deeper inside you. And sometimes, walking away is the only way to keep that part of yourself intact.